This recording from the 2024 workshop series to review the Southeast Conservation Blueprint features Rua Mordecai, Science Coordinator for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or SECAS partnership. It covers an introduction to SECAS and the Southeast Conservation Blueprint, as well as instructions on how to use the Blueprint feedback tool to capture input on how to improve the blueprint.
Plan is we're going to start off with a little background on SECAS and the blueprint, like Adam mentioned. And then I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the map review, some of the tools you'll have to provide us some feedback. And we'll be spending a bulk of the time kind of drawing things, providing some different feedback on the blueprint itself. And then we'll finish off with the next steps and some feedback on the workshop. So that's the overall plan for today. I'm going to start with just some background here for y'all, particularly about the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. My name is Rua Mordecai. I'm the Southeast Conservation Blueprint Coordinator. I know a number of you and also saw some new faces, so that's exciting. All right, so a little background. SECAS, or the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, covers 15 states and 2 territories of the Southeast. We're focused on Texas and Oklahoma. Today, of course, we do actually cover this larger area, including all of the U.S. Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico Ocean and Caribbean. Pretty big area. It's made up of a series of state, federal, nonprofit organizations. Formally, the governance has points of contact from a whole mess of different groups, including a number of folks, organizations that y'all represent as well. And it came about due to just the big changes we're seeing in the South, big urban growth, climate change, energy development, all these big landscape scale changes that don't really care so much about all these different fancy lines and jurisdictional boundaries we draw on the map. And this recognition that, if we're going to successfully conserve fish and wildlife, we need these broad collaborations across diverse public and private organizations. And the idea is that reliance on shared goals and priorities to help guide where we work, what actions to take, are going to be really important in these kind of big scale partnerships. What does SECAS do? 3 big things. Sets a bold vision and ambitious goal. We're not going to talk too much about the goal and the goal tracking and other fun stuff in this workshop, because we're really focused on designing the blueprint for action. So we're doing a lot of stuff around the blueprint itself today. And then the third piece is clearing barriers to cross-boundary collaboration. So those are the big things. But today we're really diving in on the blueprint itself. I do have to step back and talk about the vision. So the SECAS vision, this connected network of lands and waters that supports thriving fish and wildlife populations and improved quality of life for people. So that's the big vision. That's what all these different products are designed to support. So now think about, okay, there's that connected network vision. Okay, well, what does that connected network look like? What do we want to collaboratively work towards across such a big area? And that's where the conservation blueprint comes in. So this brings in these priorities for a connected network of lands and waters. So you have a series of different categories: highest, high, and medium priority, and also priority connections that cover that full area I showed earlier. And so when you add all these different priority classes up, the Southeast Conservation Blueprint covers 50% of the Southeast in different categories and classes. Some things to remember as you're thinking about the blueprint, reviewing all those other things. It identifies potential areas for a bunch of different types of conservation actions. So things like management, economic incentives, protection. And so as we all know, especially in the South, these kind of shared actions for public and across private lands are going to be critical for that connected network of lands and waters. It's also a work in progress. So we're always bringing in new data, input, and information about on-the-ground conditions. This workshop is one of the ways we do that in getting your input on what we've done so far. But we do update the blueprint every year. So as the landscape is changing, as we learn more, then we're always trying to incorporate that back into the blueprint itself. And the last thing that's really important is that it provides a regional perspective, and it's set to be used in combination with local data and knowledge. So probably all of you have some more specific local data, information, knowledge where you're working. And so the idea is that it can complement the information you already have and connect into a larger network of lands and waters. So that's the goal there. So how does the blueprint come together? We're not going to talk forever about it, but I just want to give you some general high-level pieces. So first thing, we start with a series of natural and cultural resource indicators. And if you check the chat, there'll be what we call the indicator cheat sheet. So that actually has all the different, a quick summary of all the different indicators that went into the 2024 version of the conservation blueprint. So there's a link to that, just some basic information, data sources, that kind of stuff. So it starts with all of those. We divide the regions into zones, and then we use indicators to rank areas within those zones. So we've ranked the areas within those zones. We add some additional connectivity by identifying corridors that link hubs across the landscape, and then we combine them all together into the final blueprint. That's how it works. And so now I just wanted, for folks that have known, followed the blueprint for a little while, I wanted to give you a sense of what's new for this year. So what have we improved over the last year? And the big thing has been we've made improvements in 12 indicators covering the terrestrial, freshwater, and marine ecosystem. I'll hit on a couple of those. We improved the prioritization methods to better account for regional variation, to let things that are regionally significant shine a little bit more, but still keep some balance across the different ecological regions. Another thing we did this year, which actually worked pretty well, is we freed up some extra time for user support. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but we have free support from folks that are on this call to help use the blueprint. And so we've had a lot of folks, every year there's more and more people wanting to use the blueprint. And so we took on just a little bit less on the improvement side so we can help support users use the blueprint for strengthening grant proposals and informing their conservation decisions. And that led to a decent amount of money informed by the conservation blueprint just over the last year. And the other thing I was going to mention is that, which is less relevant to Oklahoma and Texas, but we did not update the Caribbean this year. So it is a final version instead of a draft that folks reviewed, but that's one, we did a lot of work on that last year. And so this year we focused on the bigger continental area. Just to get a sense of what a few of those improvements were, we have a new integrated grassland and savannas indicator that gets at known and likely grasslands. It brings in pollinator information, patch size, historic grasslands, lots of different fun things. So that's pulling across grasslands and savanna ecosystems across the Southeast. We also have a new indicator called landscape condition. And so this is really trying to get it for those highly mobile organisms. What's the condition of the landscape at multiple scales? So it complements our habitat core indicator by providing a little bit more about the nature of what it's like to move across the landscape. We also expanded the coverage of the amphibian and reptile areas. So that covers the bigger part of the Southeast now. So it's a bigger expansion. We've been working with Park and groups on integrating that. We updated and then took a slightly different approach to imperiled aquatic species this year. We switched over to regional species of greatest conservation need instead of the state species because we gotten some feedback on some inconsistencies across state boundaries. And so the regional species are a little bit more consistent. So we updated that. And then also we work really closely with the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership, SARP. And so there's a lot of great back and forth as they're getting information on from the connectivity teams and from different states and folks. We integrate that into the indicators, and SARP integrates the blueprint into their priority areas and a lot of their reporting. So good stuff going on there. Also did a bigger update of our Gulf coral and hard bottom indicator. This is always a fun one to crack for those that work in coastal and offshore areas in the Gulf. We made significant improvements in how we integrate existing information around coral and hard bottom this year. Yeah, and then we made a bunch of other improvements, smaller, sometimes just updating to newer land cover data, fixing issues, all that kind of fun stuff. I won't highlight all of those, but just to give you a flavor of stuff that we did over the last year. Okay, now back to the blueprint itself. And one thing that a lot of folks want a little bit of background on in previous workshops, so we add a little bit of information here, and to just kind of what becomes a priority. How does something get rated as a priority in the blueprint itself? And so it's not just a stacking exercise, right? So we're not just taking the numerical layers across all these things and just adding them up and seeing what gets the highest score. What we're going for is a portfolio of places that support all the indicators, because the indicators are indicating important components of the ecosystem. And so that's really what we're doing. We use a tool, conservation planning tool called Zonation, to help us do this and make sure we have that portfolio of places in the connected network that support all those pieces. And in practice, what this means is two types of places tend to end up as high priority. The first one is places that have high values for multiple indicators. They'll come up probably no matter what you do, no matter how you do it. You add all the layers up, they'll come up too. These are the no-brainer places that are just off the charts for everything. Those will come up. The other things that come up are places with high values for a single indicator, but just can't be found anywhere else, these sort of irreplaceable sites. And so the idea is, yes, you may not hit on all cylinders, but we can't really find this in other places. So, if you've got a part that just has a huge amount of aquatic diversity and imperiled aquatic species, but it's not in the best condition in the world. It's a little bit, not in the best condition. At that point, it can still come out as a high priority because it's just a very high value for that particular indicator. So that's how it works to get to that. And so, yeah, that's a bunch of high level language. But since we're doing map review, we're talking in pictures, I figured I'd show you a visual example of how this works in practice. So I'm just picking some spots across the Southeast here. We're going to start in Augusta, Georgia as an example. So this is Augusta, Fort Eisenhower military installation out there as well. So I'm going to show you how these come up here. So we're going to start with example of one indicator. This is the grassland savanna. So these darker colors, that dark green is the highest value in the indicator itself. And so what's going on under the hood here, just to give you a quick grounding, is in Fort Eisenhower, you have a lot of important longleaf. And so this is picking up longleaf pine areas. And then up in the top right, this is actually Hegge's Rock Preserve. That's a really important granitic outcrop area with lots of rare plants and a rare ecosystem. Another one of those things that's very hard to find replaced somewhere else. So just kind of breadth of the different things in that indicator. So we got some important areas here. And then when we go back and keep an eye on that darker green areas here, you'll see how the blueprint is capturing those into that larger connected network. It says, okay, well, we got half of the geography. Where are the most important areas for this portfolio? So it's going to grab some of those. All right, so I'll give you another example. This is resilient terrestrial sites. This comes from the Nature Conservancy. So in this case, this is looking for places that are kind of conserving the stage idea. Where are these places that are going to be important for biodiversity, not just now, but into the future with climate change? So it looks at a mix of local connectedness and just the landscape complexity of where an area is. And so in this case, you've got the darker greens being the most resilient, all the way down to the browns being least resilient. And so if you pay attention to some of the darker green areas, you can see how the blueprint is now trying to make sure it includes those in this larger network. And one point on this as well is that most of the indicators in the blueprint are designed to be climate resilient. So to identify places and conditions that are important, not just now, but into the future. So if you think about this context of, big intact habitat corridors, aquatic connectivity, all these there's a lot of different measures that are going to be important even as species ranges shift across the geography. So there's a real focus in the blueprint itself on trying to make this connected network resilient to climate change, because we know things are moving now and they're going to keep moving. All right, here's another example, in this case aquatic. This is imperiled aquatic species here. You can see it along the floodplains. And then as we go back and forth, you can see how some of those areas are getting integrated into that larger connected network. And we also have a series of cultural resource indicators as well. You mentioned that bigger vision, that improved quality of life for people. So this is an example, probably one you'll notice in some specific spots. This is equitable access to potential parks. So now we're talking about places where socially vulnerable communities don't have a nearby walk to a park. And so again, darker colors are those more vulnerable communities that aren't nearby to existing park. We go back and forth here, and you can see how that's integrated into the larger network to make sure there's an equitable distribution around some benefits of nature within the larger blueprint. Here, go back here. This is one you'll probably see because it does pull out a series of, sometimes neighborhoods and places we don't always focus conservation efforts on. And so we've had a number of discussions with folks on the indicator teams related to the kind of equitable access to try to keep honing in on the best places for trying to facilitate that. All right, and so there you go. That's a sense of how all these things go and how the blueprint is trying to kind of get the good stuff out of all these different indicators we're putting in. Now I want to talk real quickly about corridors. So we have a bunch of things related to connectivity and indicators, but really to make that a connected network, we also add in additional connectivity with the corridors. We do this through a least cost paths analysis. So they're basically corridors linking hubs across the shortest distance possible while routing through as much blueprint priority as possible. So that's pretty much what they're trying to do. Where are these big hubs? How do we connect them? And they're large areas of highest priority and or protected areas. So basically what it's trying to do is if you got a big area of public lands or even a mix of private and public lands, then that can be a hub. Because we all know the public and private landscape are critical to the future of this area. And I'll give you an example of this in an area near Austin, Texas. So Austin's in the southern part of this here, and you can see Balcones Canyon lands. So here's an example of what this looks like. We'll look at the blueprint in that area near Austin. And from here, now I remember we're taking those okay, let's grab the highest priority places, those darkest purple there, and also contiguous parts of the patch that are protected as well. So here's the priorities, and then here are the hubs in black that come out of that. And then from there, we have these corridors that are trying to connect those hubs through the shortest distance through as much blueprint priority as possible. And so that's the hubs and corridors. This is also a separate layer that you can download with all the other blueprint data. We'll mention it at the end, but all this stuff, documentation, code, all this fun stuff is available for you to dig as deep as you want. Yeah, and then we put it all together, and then here we go. Then you have the blueprint. And that's what you'll be looking at today, the full piece here. All right, so the link that you're going to see into the chat and the tool that you're going to be using for providing feedback, this is what it's going to look like when you start. So this is the blueprint feedback tool. I'm just going to give you a quick orientation to the different things you can do, how it works, all that other fun stuff here. So this is where you'll start from this workshop. We've cleared any past workshop comments from here just so you're looking at it from scratch, but we saved them for years and we use them obsessively in testing things and figuring out what to improve. So you start here all the way zoomed out into the larger blueprint. You can, in the right here, there's a plus and minus to zoom in and out. You can also use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out. You can go to a particular location. So if you're looking for a spot, I'm going to grab, let's do Congaree National Park. That's kind of halfway in between all the different states. So we can do that to navigate. Always the first part is just figuring out where you want to go. So you can do that to find different things. On the left here, we've got a few different options. This is the blueprint layer itself. This little eyeball, if you click on it, you can turn it on and off if you just kind of want to find where you're looking first or compare. So you click the eyeball to do that. We've also added some different boundaries to help you navigate. So if you want to look by kind of up 12 watershed boundaries, you can click on the little eyeball. Protected areas, so if you click on that, you can see protected area boundaries. We're not doing so much ocean stuff, but we also have some offshore zones and some other components there. State boundaries, and then Virgin Islands estates and municipalities in Puerto Rico. So we've got a few things just to help you orient on this side. We did try to cram all the different indicators and a bunch of other layers into this feedback tool, and it was just too slow to use. So we're still figuring that piece out. But we've got those components here. You also have a few options up here in the top right. The feedback is what we're going to be doing a bunch of, sort of drawing little polygons and things like that. You also can change the base map. So you can click on the base map and you can change it if you want to look at imagery or some of those other things, you can do that. If you want to look at the legend, you have the legend here. And you can also add extra layers to help you review. So we just had a few of them for you. But if you want to add some additional layers, you can click here and click to add data. And then you have available to everything in ArcGIS, your Living Atlas, your normal stuff here. You can add data if you have a kind of a web service you want to pull in, you can add it there. If you have a file, shape file or something you want to put over top, you can also add that there as well. And actually all these data are available up on the hub, I think Haley mentioned as well. Yeah, so you can add some additional stuff if that helps with context. And yeah, so those are those pieces here. And now I'm just going to give you a quick demo for the feedback of what we're looking for here. So for providing feedback, you click on this little feedback button, and you'll have a series of different kind of options here under feedback. So there's under prioritize, correctly prioritize, over prioritize. I just have a question or some other comments. And if you have a comment that just doesn't quite fit into drawing a polygon, you can also just put it in the chat, just a general thought or piece that you're seeing. That's fine too. Yeah, so these are basically if something looks good, if something just seems over prioritized, or just a general question. I'm curious about this particular pattern. So I might go here and say, what's going on here? I've got a question about, let's see, this area that's a priority here. So I can now kind of draw my little comment here, however I want to draw. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it gives it a spot here. So I've drawn my little piece. I can, if I double click on it, then I finished it. And now I have a question about this area. And I might go to, why is this a priority? Or whatever it is. And then I'm just going to put my name in here. And I swear I can type my last name. Yeah, and that's basically it. I've made my polygon. I have this broad question, something like that. I hit a create. Then I have this feature. Now, one of the things we have for if you have questions, we have our GIS folks and other staff along that will help kind of look underneath and kind of help you figure out, okay, what's going on underneath, what indicators are driving things, all those other pieces. So this is if you say have a question. If you think something is correctly prioritized, that's also really helpful for us. We do really want to know if something looks good. But if it's correctly prioritized, it's also great to know what is so great about it. So what is it that you like? So I'll click back here. Something's correctly prioritized. You can draw your piece. This looks right. But it's also helpful for us to know, very important for the community's access for recreation, or super important for rare plants, or some of those things. So that's also helpful in understanding if you think something's over or under. Let us know why, because the way we're fixing stuff is kind of looking at the underlying indicators and different pieces. So that's basically what we're sending you off to do. There's also some ways to get back and forth between this and the Blueprint Explorer. So for those of you who are familiar with the Blueprint Explorer, that lets you look at all the different indicators and stuff underneath. And so we have it all, that's fully populated with all the underlying stuff. So In a little bit, folks, if you want to try to use the Blueprint Explorer to go back and forth for your comments, for those interested in that, I can give you a quick demo of how to easily go back and forth between these two tools.
So how do you easily jump back and forth between the Blueprint Feedback tool, which is designed to capture those polygons with your input on how to improve the blueprint, and the Blueprint Explorer, which is designed to help you understand why a particular area is scoring highly in the priorities? We've tried to make it relatively simple to switch back and forth between them, so once you find your spot in one tool, you can easily zoom to that same area in the other without having to waste a bunch of time getting oriented. So once you've found your spot in the Blueprint Feedback tool, you can copy the coordinates by first activating this Copy a Latitude Longitude feature in the upper middle of your screen. Click to drop a pin and populate the specific coordinates of that site, and then copy them to your clipboard using this button. Once you flip over to the Blueprint Explorer, I encourage you to activate the View Point Data mode using this toggle. This mode is specifically designed to help reveal how the underlying data beneath the hood of the blueprint is scoring and what's driving priority. Then you can paste your coordinates into the Blueprint Explorer using this Find a Location feature in the upper right. Using the drop-down menu, switch over to the Find by Latitude and Longitude option, and then you can paste your coordinates from the Blueprint Feedback tool. Hit Go, and it will zoom you into that same area so you don't lose your place. Once you've found your spot, the Explorer will tell you about the specific pixel that's in the center of the crosshairs on your screen. To see how the underlying data is scoring, switch over to the Indicators tab on the left, and on the left sidebar, you will then see all of the indicators that are present in that area and how they score out of the range of potential values. You can see that this pixel is scoring highly on amphibian and reptile areas, intact habitat cores, landscape condition, South Atlantic forest birds, and several other freshwater indicators. And this will give you a sense of why it's being prioritized highly in the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. If you want to move the other direction, you can also copy coordinates from the Explorer and paste them into the Blueprint Feedback tool like so. Copy the coordinates from the top of the left sidebar, and then paste them into the Find a Location search bar at the top of the Blueprint Feedback tool. Hit search, and that will again drop a pin and zoom you back into that same area. We hope this helps.